Hello, I'm Mark Hooper. Without the Beatles podcast, obviously we speak to lots of amazing people who are famous in their own right about how their lives or careers would have been different without the Beatles. I thought it'd be quite interesting to talk about how they affected me, particularly as I started my career as a music journalist, and it kind of struck me looking back on how I first got into the Beatles. I used to love this. Is my parents had the first "Please Please Me" album. I remember like something which people don't really do so much now. I hate to be like a 50-year-old, 50-something podcaster banging on about vinyl, but I used to put on a record and just read the back of records, which you never do anymore, obviously, because you're playing it through a device or even if it's on a CD. And I remember sitting there reading it. I'm just going to read this to you by Tony Barrow, who was their press officer, started off as a local music journalist, record reviewer, as he calls himself. And the first line: "Pop picking is a fast and furious business these days, whether you're on the recording side listening out or on the disc counter side listening in. As a record reviewer, I find myself installed halfway in between with an ear cocked in either direction." And it goes on for like 2 columns. I don't know how there's like 400, 500 words. But it kind of struck me. It's really funny reading it back now because I think I can sort of trace my career back to thinking, wow, this guy, he's got a job as a record reviewer and he gets to write on the back of Beatles albums. That's a job. I never knew you could do that because I've always been into music, but I'm not really a musician. I thought, wow, I could write about it. And there's lots of people later on, like Neil Tennant and from the Pet Shop Boys, and I love the fact that he started off as a record reviewer, music journalist for Smash Hits, and then ended up having a pop career off the back of it. So that always struck with me. But it's really interesting. It made me think more because I got the idea that you could have a career out of liking music, I suppose. And I was always quite good at writing, and I thought I could combine the two. It's really funny reading back on this because it's so naive the way it's written. But I think it's a real shame we've kind of lost recently. As an example, here's a brilliant recent album, Silk Sonic. This is what you get on a record now. Loads of credits, millions of credits, loads of people involved in the album. And that's all it says. There's nothing to read. I mean, you could, if you want, exhaustively read through who's on backing vocals on Smoking Out the Window. But it's not the same experience. And I think, there's no slight on them. They know who their audience are. And by comparison, obviously one of the most famous covers ever, Sgt. Pepper, was pioneering its time, not only because it was the first album to print lyrics on the back sleeve, certainly in the pop genre, but also, famously they had, the gatefold sleeve, the insert with these cutout patches, which obviously, if you ever cut them out or coloured them in, you've ruined the record. And also just, little details like this, which I've only just realised Paul Weller ripped off on one of his solo albums. I can't remember which one it was, but he definitely has. But this idea that the record sleeve and the packaging, you can be as innovative with as you can with the music within it. And what you do with the words is also really fascinating. This is a brilliant example, which kind of people don't cite as much as Sgt. Pepper, but I love the fact if you have the double 7-inch version of Magical Mystery Tour, it comes with this little booklet inside with still photography and a little cartoon from the Magical Mystery Tour film. Look at that little insert of I Am the Walrus lyrics. And the sort of thought and packaging which goes into this. And as you sort of go on, bands I was really fascinated by, obviously, I mentioned Paul Weller, when he launched the Style Council, he was clearly kind of, it was about a whole package and he was packaging himself in a different way. And he employed the journalist Paolo Hewitt. And I love it. It's so deliberately, and I think in a way to piss off the Jam fans, they're deliberately quite pretentious. There's a little quote from Jean-Paul Marat, 18th century French visionary. "Don't be deceived when they tell you things are better now, even if there's no poverty to be seen because the poverty's been hidden." And it goes on and on. And Paolo, bless him, it was almost like stream of consciousness, the stuff he'd write. And there's a little booklet which came with it, and it's got all the lyrics in here. But it starts off in really, "Of days such as these, it's here in Le Café Bleu where, amidst the smoke, steam and colours present, I'm to be found passing the hours of mortal time." He's obviously just been given a word count, so just get on with it, write some pretentious French twaddle, sort of French influenced twaddle. But I love the fact that, there's things to get. If you listen to an album, what do you do now? You don't have a whole booklet list to go through. And I suppose the only equivalent is box sets. and also as a journalist, that used to be a little outlet, and people now say, occasionally record labels will say, "Oh, can you write the press release for one of our new releases?" But there used to be a job where you could actually write this. Paolo here, a writer, music journalist, got to write an entire booklet. What amazing for your mates, even though I think they've sadly fallen out more recently. But it kind of struck me that there's a kind of an art to record sleeves, not just the writing but the way they're packaged, and it's being lost as the format's shrinking or like is evaporating completely now. With you basically get to look at a thumbnail, you don't get that same immersive experience, and it's a real shame because it feels like there's a sort of a lack of care in how records are produced. And obviously you'll get the new Taylor Swift album, how if you buy the actual physical album, there's a new generation who are discovering that again. You can read through all the lyrics and find that, but there's not as much of a sort of packaging. And I think only in, as I said, there's box sets. If you get like a really big box set, because I think they're appealing generally to an audience who are slightly older, who are used to having someone sit down and read. There's a fun little anecdote about that. My friend Graham, who's an ex-music journalist, sort of semi-retired and lives in the Sussex countryside, beautiful house in the countryside. And his local pub is actually it's the bar of Roger Daltrey's trout farm, because that's in his sort of local village. And Roger's son-in-law runs it and runs the brewery there. Really, really lovely guy called Des, funny enough, like my Without the Beatles partner. And one day, obviously Graham knew who Des was and knew his relationship with Roger, but he doesn't bang on about it. And one day, Des said, "Oh, Graham, would you mind Roger wants to meet you. He's got a writing project. I mean, do you mind like coming to the pub, next week and in whatever time, and he'll tell you about it." And he was so excited, and he obviously thought it was going to be a new Who box set or a Roger Daltrey solo album or something. Do the sleeve notes for it. He's like, "This is going to be amazing. This is going to make my year." And he turned up there, and Roger was like, "Oh, yes, sorry, Graham. Des has been telling me all about you. You're the writer, aren't you?" He's like, "Oh, I've got something I really want you to help me with. It's really important. I need to write a really brilliant letter to the council because I need to get planning permission for something we're doing with the park." And he's like, said he's never felt more crestfallen in his life, and he prepared all his whole CV of all these bands he'd worked with and stuff. And he basically just had to write a letter to the council. But it turned out it all ended up quite well because they got their planning permission. So now he gets free beers for life whenever he goes in there. But the one thing I was going to say is that because there is a bit of a revival at the moment with vinyl revival, everyone talks about, but you don't see so much when a new album comes out, as we said with the Silk Sonic album. There's not that thought of what I guess maybe they think people are going to be on their other devices, and there's not this idea of the album being a physical project, which product which is handled and interacted with. There's been a few exceptions. The David Bowie's last album, Black Star, which was amazingly designed so that it's got all these kind of physical Easter eggs. So this over time, it's completely black, black sleeve. Which, if you tilt to the light, there's a black star sort of embossed, well not embossed, but in a gloss, so that you can make out a black star on it. But over time, it fades. Stars. It's got photosensitive paper it's printed on, so stars appear into black, and then people still haven't realised that. I think there's an inner groove in there, which is obviously another thing which was inspired by the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper when they had the inner groove run out. But there's loads of these little Easter eggs, and I love the fact that Bowie, when he was going, he spent a lot of time with the designer coming up with these little ideas they could do, and just sort of things which would amuse themselves. And I saw that in a design magazine recently, the designer wrote about it and said, there's still there's about, I can't remember, like 12 or 15 different things which happened with that album, and he said people still haven't discovered them, and if you find out, mail in and find out about it. But the one thing I was thinking is that because we all consume music digitally, and there's we lose this idea of what we can do with the written word in the release of albums now. I went to this fascinating talk, or sort of open studio almost, with Brian Eno once. He invited a load of journalism to come around. He had this idea. He's very into, at the time, he was very into generative music, which was basically a music program. So you had like a CD-ROM, you put it into your computer or into your disc player, and he'd written a program which would play music, but it would play it randomly. There were different sections, so that every time you played that album, it was a different composition. Basically, they just had the elements, and the computer would pull in different parts at random. So I'd really it was probably one of the proudest moments of my life, because before that I was quite young, and I just out of university, I've been studying philosophy, and I've been studying authorship and philosophy of art. And at one point, he said any questions, and everyone was being a bit shy, and people were asking kind of quite dull questions and writing down on their notepads. And I put my hand up and I said, so who's the author of this? And he was like, that's a fascinating question. I spent a lot of my life trying to work this out, because it's not me. I wrote the program, but I didn't compose the music. So is the composer the computer? Is the composer the guy who presses play on the record? I don't know what I am. I'm an engineer or something. But anyway, and he asked me to stay behind. We had this amazing chat. I was like, thanks for talking about that. What made you think about that? I've been talking about this a lot. So in the meantime, I'm just going to read a bit of twaddle from Paolo Hewitt's While Away the Days. The singles are always brilliant. This is my ever-changing moods. Watch out in March, those days when there's still winter's hint left over on the frosty ground. Your feet cracking the century-still blades of grass. Your eyes stinging from the purest air. Watch out! Exclamation mark. Good things happen in April. It's just, what's he doing? So I'm just like, right about the seasons. And yeah, so anyway, but it'd be lovely to hear any of your examples of, I'm getting distracted already. See, this is what you used to be able to do with singles. But I'd love to hear any of your own examples of like brilliant, the more pretentious, the better sleeve notes. Bob Dylan, Highway 61 is a brilliant one. I'd probably end on that one, because I challenge anybody to read that without being, if they're not stoned. It's just a complete stream of consciousness twaddle, but I love it. And yeah, speak to you soon.